You can't be a dark chosen one without losing these three things. No one tells you the truth at the beginning of the path. They might say you're gifted. They might say you're different, even spiritually powerful. But no one says this: the dark chosen one's power does not arrive until something inside you has already been taken, ripped out, burned away, or shattered beyond repair. This journey isn't about adding more light. It's about subtracting what isn't true. It's about loss, sacred loss. And if you're one of us, then you already know that the moment your real transformation began was the moment something important was torn from your grip. Whether it was your identity, your belonging, or your illusion of safety, it wasn't random. It was a divine extraction. And it hurt like hell because it had to. You can't enter the furnace of divine darkness holding onto anything false. It all has to go. The first thing you lose on this path is your need to belong. It sounds simple. It's not. The need to belong is hardwired into the human nervous system. We all want it. It gives us safety, stability, a sense of place. But for dark chosen ones, that wiring eventually turns into chains. Because the more deeply you awaken, the more misaligned you become with the surface level values of most people. You start to see through masks. You start to feel the hollowness in conversations that others find normal. You notice how energy shifts when you speak your truth. And slowly, sometimes violently, you begin to be removed from the circles you once thought you needed. Friends fade. Family doesn't understand. Lovers pull away. And suddenly you're alone.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Not alone like you're missing someone. Alone like the universe is wiping your slate clean. It feels like exile. But what it actually is consecration. You are being pulled away from what dilutes you. You are being emptied so the truth can take up residence. You are being taught that your power cannot come from acceptance, it has to come from alignment. And that means you can't walk this path looking for applause. The moment you stop needing approval is the moment your real mission starts. But let me ask you something uncomfortable. How much of what you're still doing right now, your work, your relationships, even your spiritual practices, is still being driven by the old hunger to be liked? Because the moment you're ready to let that go, your vibration will skyrocket. You'll begin attracting different realities, not ones that coddle your ego, ones that demand your power. The second thing you lose is your illusion of control. And this one breaks people, because even those of us who say we trust the universe, we don't, not really. We make plans. We construct identities. We build spiritual routines. We try to manifest outcomes. But the dark chosen one walks a different path. A brutal, sacred path where life doesn't let you control anything. Everything you thought you could manage begins to unravel. Jobs collapse. Relationships end without closure. Health scares appear. You're thrown into the unknown, and there's no map. Why? Because you're being broken open to receive a level of guidance that can't be found in logic. You're being trained to surrender before you understand, to act on intuition before confirmation, to move when the soul says move even when the ego says no. The illusion of control is the biggest addiction in the modern world. And on this path, it's ripped from your hands, not to punish you, but to rewire you. You begin to realize that true power is not about knowing what will happen next. It's about becoming the kind of vessel that can hold any storm and still channel truth. And that leads to the third thing you lose, the most painful and sacred of all, the false self, the persona you've built since you were a child, the roles you've played to survive, the masks you wore to be safe. You don't just drop these things gently. They're torn off, often through crisis, loss, and betrayal. You're left looking in the mirror and not recognizing who you are anymore. And that's the point. Because the identity you lose was never really you, it was a survival construct. Useful, even necessary. But now, it's in the way. The dark chosen one can't operate from personality. We're not here to impress. We're not here to blend in. We're here to transmit. And that means we have to die to who we were. Not just once, but over and over. Every level of awakening requires another layer of death, another unraveling, another release, until what's left is raw, real, and indestructible. So ask yourself, what part of your identity are you still defending, even though your soul is done with it? The dark chosen one doesn't awaken in comfort, we awaken in collapse. And we rise from the ashes not just reborn, but rewired. With every loss we gain a kind of power that cannot be faked, a kind of vision that cannot be borrowed, a kind of presence that makes the old world tremble. Because we didn't just survive the fire, we became it. If it didn't break you, it wasn't your initiation. Here's what separates you from the rest. Most people will never understand that breaking is not the end, it's the beginning. And if you're still standing, if you're still breathing through the silence of your darkest nights, then what you went through wasn't meant to kill you. It was meant to initiate you. And if it didn't break you, it wasn't your true initiation. Because the path of the dark chosen one doesn't begin with blessings. It begins with devastation, with everything being stripped away until all that's left is the one thing the world could never touch: your essence. We don't talk enough about what it feels like to reach that place. Not the poetic version, the real version. The moment you're crying in a room alone and there's no one coming. The moment the friends you thought would always be there fall silent. The moment your spiritual practices stop working, your goals lose meaning, and you don't even recognize your own reflection. That's not depression. That's a sacred demolition. Your soul is dismantling every structure that kept you bound to a version of life too small for your destiny. And what comes next isn't clarity, it's void. And that void is where your true power begins. Because unlike others who chase light to escape the dark, we the dark chosen ones, we walk into it. We let it swallow us whole. We learn its language. We understand that the dark isn't evil. It's ancient. It's holy. It's where truth lies unfiltered. It's where the illusions go to die. And if you don't face it, if you don't collapse inside of it, you can't claim what's hidden within it. That's what separates you from the rest. You didn't stop when it hurt. You didn't run when it got quiet. You stayed. And because you stayed, you unlocked something no one can teach: spiritual weight. The heaviness that comes with holding truth in a world obsessed with performance. The ability to feel everything deeply without being consumed. The wisdom to let things die when they're no longer aligned, even when it breaks your heart. You've become someone who can see through, not just situations, but people, timelines, intentions. You look into someone's eyes and you know what they're not saying. You walk into a room and instantly sense the tension no one's naming. You don't need proof. You feel it. You've become the kind of soul that threatens comfort because your presence alone demands honesty. And let me tell you, this is not something that makes you popular, but it makes you potent. People will project onto you, fear you, mislabel you, because you carry something they've never faced in themselves. You remind them of the darkness they've denied, but some people, those who are ready, will feel it differently. They'll be drawn to you like gravity. They'll say, "I don't know what it is about you, but I feel safe here." Or, "You feel like home." That's not about your personality. That's about your frequency. You've stabilized chaos within yourself, and now you emit that stability to others. That's the mark of one who's been broken open and reassembled by soul, not ego. But here's the test. The deeper you go, the more you lose your ability to participate in illusions. You can't fake small talk. You can't pretend in relationships. You can't do work that has no soul. You've outgrown anything not built on truth, and that makes the world feel smaller at first. But eventually it becomes clearer. You begin to build a life not based on achievement, but on resonance. You no longer chase, you attract, not because you've mastered the law of attraction, but because you've become a magnet for what's real. And here's where things get wild. Once you accept the loss, once you allow the initiation to fully gut your old self, you begin to download abilities. Spiritual technologies encoded in your DNA begin to activate. You get flashes of future events. You speak and people feel energy move. You dream things that later unfold in real time. You say things that don't feel like they came from you and they didn't. Your higher self, your guides, your soul team, they start speaking through you. Not because you studied the right rituals, but because you surrendered to the furnace. You passed the test. You became available to the real mission. And you're not trying to save anyone. You're not trying to be a guru. You're not trying to build a platform. You're just being, and in that being you transmit. Your life becomes a living activation. Your presence becomes a permission slip. Your silence carries codes. You don't need to preach. You don't need to prove. You just walk into rooms and things shift. Because you're not walking alone anymore. You never were. But now you can feel the support. Now you understand that every loss was a recalibration. Every heartbreak was a release. Every ego death was a resurrection. You didn't just go through the dark night of the soul, you became the night. And in doing so, you became immune to fear. So I'll ask you this, if everything you lost was never truly yours, then what's trying to reach you now that you've made space for it? Because the moment you stop mourning the ashes, you'll realize the fire was never there to destroy you. It was there to reveal you. You'll be tested by everything you once loved, but this time you won't bow. It happens quietly at first. After the collapse, after the void, after the ashes have cooled, you begin to rise. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with a new kind of movement, the kind that only happens when you've buried the false and are now being resurrected by truth. You feel stronger, clearer, more whole. And just when you begin to settle into your power, it begins again. Not the collapse, no, something subtler. The return of everything you once loved, everything you once begged for, everything you thought you couldn't live without. But this time it comes back differently. It comes back not to comfort you, but to test you. Because the real test of a dark chosen one isn't what you do when everything is falling apart. It's what you do when everything you used to want is offered to you again, and now you have the power to say no. This is where many fall back asleep. You see, the spiritual path has many awakenings, but each awakening is followed by a temptation, not in the form of evil or sin, no, that would be easy to detect. Temptation shows up dressed like healing, like reconciliation, like a second chance at something you thought you lost. An ex suddenly texts you. An old friend you outgrew wants to reconnect. A job that once drained you now offers more money. A place you escaped starts calling you home again. But look closer, you'll feel it. That strange twist in your gut, that subtle resistance in your chest. That's not nostalgia. That's your soul whispering, you've already learned this lesson. Don't rewrite the same chapter. This is the moment when the path splits. Will you bow to the familiar, or will you stand in the frequency you died to become? Because that's the real question now. Not can you handle pain? You've already proven you can. The question is, can you handle power without forgetting who you are? Can you sit in your new clarity without reaching for old comforts? Can you stay rooted in your truth when what once fed your ego now knocks on your door? This is what separates the truly initiated from the partially awakened. Many people begin the path. Few walk it through the fire. Fewer still walk past the fire into the garden that follows and say, "No, that version of me is gone. I don't need what they used to need. I'm building something new." That's the power of real transformation. It's not about rejecting the world. It's about outgrowing it so completely that what once had power over you now dissolves in your presence. But make no mistake, these tests will come wearing familiar faces, and they'll be timed perfectly. You'll think maybe this is a sign. You'll think maybe the timing finally aligns. And that's the trick, because the test isn't whether it's available, it's whether it's aligned. The universe wants to know, will you shrink for the sake of ease? Will you betray your new standards just to feel what's familiar? Because every time you say no to something that once controlled you, you don't just grow, you reclaim. You reclaim a piece of energy that was fragmented. You pull back part of your power that you gave away. And every time you do this, your frequency sharpens. You become less reactive, more intentional. You begin to move with a kind of unshakable grace. You don't hustle, you don't argue, you embody. And embodiment isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove itself. It's subtle, rooted, dense with presence. It walks into a room and doesn't chase energy, it alters it. That's what you're becoming. A force that doesn't bend to what returns from your past, because your vision is too tuned to what's coming. But you'll still feel the ache. Let's be honest about that. Just because you're strong enough to say no doesn't mean it won't hurt. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away from a version of love that almost fits, a version of safety that almost works, a version of yourself that almost healed. But almost is the final trap. You didn't come here to settle. You came here to rewrite. And rewrites require discipline. Fierce, grounded, radiant discipline. This is the part no one claps for. No one sees it. No one praises you for what you don't choose. But the universe sees it. Your guides feel it. Your higher self registers it like a lock being opened in the timeline. Because every time you walk past the old with a soft but steady no, you are saying yes to the version of your future that is waiting on the other side of your integrity. And once you pass this phase, something beautiful happens. Your world recalibrates. It starts to reflect your inner frequency faster. Opportunities that once took months appear in days. Conversations that used to drain you no longer happen. People who carry your new vibration begin to orbit your life like magnets. Not because you forced anything, but because you stopped betraying yourself. That's the secret. The universe doesn't give you more until you stop accepting less. So let me ask you, and answer this with your body, not your mind. What are you still holding space for that no longer matches the frequency of the version of you you're becoming? Because when you answer that, really answer it, you'll see why the tests came. They weren't obstacles. They were checkpoints. Moments for you to choose your power over your pattern. And when you choose differently, not once, but repeatedly, reality begins to obey you. Because now it knows you've remembered who you are. You were never meant to blend in, you were meant to end the cycle. At some point, everything clicks. Not in the way we fantasize, it will not with fireworks or dramatic announcements, but in the silence between breaths, in the space between who you were and who you're becoming. You realize that this journey was never about being understood. It was never about fitting in or being liked or even healing every piece of you. It was about liberation, not the kind that comes from external change, but the kind that erupts from within when you no longer ask for permission to exist. You were never meant to blend in. That discomfort you've carried your whole life. That sense that something was off, even when everything looked fine. That wasn't brokenness, it was brilliance buried beneath conditioning. You came into this world with a frequency too raw, too deep, too powerful for systems built on surface-level survival. And so the world tried to tame you, make you smaller, safer, softer, more manageable. And for a while you complied. You wore the mask. You played the role. You tried to find a way to be spiritual without disrupting the room. But it never worked. Because every time you played small, your soul started screaming. The dark chosen ones are not here to decorate the system. We are here to end the cycle, to interrupt the inheritance of silence, to dissolve the patterns that have run through bloodlines for centuries. That's why your pain has been so specific. That's why your wounds are not just yours. You were born into a lineage that needed someone strong enough to stop the repetition, and the universe chose you. Not because you were the most perfect or prepared, but because you were the most willing to walk through the dark without guarantees, willing to be rejected by the world in order to be claimed by your truth. And now, here you are, not finished, not flawless, but free. Free in a way that only those who've lost everything false can understand. You don't need the room to approve anymore. You are the room. You carry the frequency of someone who has grieved their illusions and still stood back up. Someone who has stared down everything they were afraid to lose and whispered, "If it costs me my soul, I don't want it." That kind of clarity cannot be bought. It can only be born through fire. And now, everything about your life begins to change. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're being truer. You walk differently. You speak differently. You make decisions that don't make sense to others but feel sacred to you. And you no longer explain. You no longer justify. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. Because you know deep in your bones that your very presence is prophecy. Not in an arrogant way, but in an undeniable way. Your frequency is a message. Your story is an activation. Your very being tells the world, "This cycle ends with me." And the world begins to respond, not always with applause, often with resistance. But that's how you know you're doing something real. You're not here to be liked. You're here to shift timelines, and you will. Not by force, not by chasing, but by standing in such deep alignment with your truth that everything false either transforms or disappears. So the final question is this: now that you've lost what wasn't you, what will you finally build with what remains? Because that's the real gift of being a dark chosen one. Once the fire clears, once the illusions fall, once the ego dies, you are left with something so pure, so solid, so unshakable that the entire universe can move through it. And when you live from that place, you don't just survive this world. You rewrite it.